Alright, we in there. I just gotta do a couple more things and I'll be ready. Oh, damn, dog. You all right over there? Sound like you just took a big rip, puppy. All right, we about ready? I think we about ready. We got everything all set up. How is everybody doing? I am a senior political analyst and debate prep master, senior debate analyst. I already said that. What else is there? What other titles do I have? King of the Andals and the First Men, heir to the Iron Throne, mother of dragons. Person that's right about everything. All the things. Just pick your poison. Those are all my titles. But we're about to get started on watching this shit right here.
The idea that we would go flirting with multiple wars of choice at this point, it's not left-wing or right-wing.
See, bigwigs have written many mournful op-eds and essays about American isolationism and its influence on the world. Now the feverish talk is of an imperial Trump building an American empire with dominion of the Americas and tentacles stretching to Tehran. So if the Donroe Doctrine, as people are calling it, means doing anything that's in the US national interest, the question is whether big...
Oh yeah, leave a like, subscribe, share with your friends, share with your brothers and sisters, share with your father, but don't bother sharing with your mother, because chances are I already fucking told her. Let me get the dogs out of here and close the door 1 second. Get the fuck out! Get the fuck out of here! There's my OBS. Make sure everything's looking good on screen. Up here. Alright, we in there. Let's get going. Lead us into Pierce. Oh yeah, also, I am going to eventually cover Pierce Morgan and Nick Fluentes, but I think I'm waiting on that for Jake Farr to come and do it with me, so I'm holding off on that one, even though it's kind of old news now. I think Pierce Morgan cooked him. Jake thinks the other thing, so I think Tuesday we're going to go over that as well. Why are you in fucking lean back mode? Alright. Got everything rolling here? Let's go.
Nigeria, Syria, Venezuela, Greenland, Mexico, and Iran are in fact in the US national interest. What happened to just worrying about the price of eggs? And where does it leave the many people who thought that the peace part of peace through strength really was in the US national interest all along? Well, joining me to debate all this is Dave Smith, host of Part of the Problem, Coleman Hughes, host of Conversations with Coleman at Free Press, Kyle Kulinski, aka Second and Michael Knowles, host of the Daily Wire's Michael Knowles Show. A truly stellar panel, even given the caliber of the stellar panels we have, which I think you were discussing with Theo Von, in fact, Dave Smith, in a complimentary way. So thank you, and Happy New Year to all of you. Dave Smith, let me start with you. Welcome back to Uncensored.
Thank you.
There's a lot going on. You know, I decided to have a week off after Christmas. Big mistake. Never have a week off in the Trump administration. It seemed like all hell was breaking loose. And yet, if you park the rhetoric, which can be very incendiary on all sides, and you cut to the presumed ideology of what Trump is trying to do here, I do see the argument. I may not agree with all of it, but I see the logic of what he's trying to do and why he thinks it's in America's interest. And that applies to whether it's Venezuela and getting rid of Maduro, or whether it's the Iran situation, and so on. Do you see the logic, even if you don't agree with it all?
No.
Okay.
I mean, no, I mean, Piers, it's, as you said, you know, Donald Trump can say America first means whatever I say it means, but if America first meant one thing to everybody who's ever uttered the phrase, and then he wants to change that to mean America first means regime changes all around the world, huge, enormous, unthinkable bloated defense budgets like he just requested from Congress. And if he's going to think that none of his supporters are going to have a problem with that, or that they're all just going to change their views because he decided to change his, I think he's going to find out how well that works for him in the mid.
Well, let's take a look at, well, fuck polling right now. I know enough about it. Right now, if you look at it, Donald Trump's approval on Israel from his own supporters is sitting between 85 and 90%. Donald Trump's approval on funding and backing Ukraine is sitting in the high 70s. Most of Trump's supporters, and actually most of the United States, support taking Maduro out of power. So it turns out Donald Trump's interventionism is actually more popular than he is sometimes. So Dave's talking about a tiny percentage of his supporters. He's not even able to see Trump's logic. He is so simple-minded, he can't even understand something he doesn't agree with. So, starting right out, Dave Smith's a fucking idiot, but give me 1 second, I'm sorry. I should have been more prepared. This is all on the fly. Alright, we in there. Let's let him at least finish speaking before I roast the fuck out of him.
Midterms this year, and I think it's going to be a disaster. And, you know, obviously it's true, Piers, as you said, and we all know Donald Trump will say all types of crazy things and then never follow through with that. But he also just asked Congress for a $1.5 trillion defense budget, and that to me does indicate that he is anticipating a real deal war coming up, or at least the possibility of it. And if he means the things that he says, I mean, I don't exactly know how you do that. I don't know how you say we run Venezuela and we'll dictate who the next regime is and we'll dictate where the oil goes without at least an effort of like 100,000 troops. I'm not even sure that would be enough to do it. So it's unclear what exactly the next move is going to be, and that's really when we'll find out what.
Now, I'd like a list of these things from Dave Smith about the things Trump said he wasn't going to do and did, because generally what Trump does is overstate what he's going to do at the beginning, which is a negotiation tactic. You see people all over politics say it, we want to abolish this thing, and then when they actually get down to the policy and start making responsible legislation, generally it means less funding or higher regulations or blah, blah, blah. So, you know, defund the FBI is something you saw on the right, and generally what that meant was just clean up the corruption in the FBI, and most people were content with that besides the extremists on both sides. Same thing with, you see on the left, I'm not going to do the both sides thing, I don't give a shit. If you think I'm a dishonest actor, then, you know, change the fucking channel, asshole. So, going from there, I'd like to see that list from Dave Smith of crazy things Trump said and never did at least some version of. Maybe not to the T of what he says. He definitely overstates things quite often, but he at least follows up with something similar to what he initially proposed. So we'll go from there. But what was the other thing he said that I thought was retarded just now? Oh, the 100,000 troops in Venezuela. We're going to control Venezuelan oil. It's going to take 100,000 troops. This is the guy that said going into Iran would cause a war, that Iran was going to respond and attack us, that it was bad for the country, blah, 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 blah. He was wrong on every single account when it came to Iran. We went in there completely undetected in a great military feat, got planes there and bombed their nuclear facilities before anyone even knew we were there, and they were back home for dinner that night. We did the same thing in Venezuela. We went in there. Nobody knew we were going in. We took out their leader. Didn't have a single United States death. Didn't even lose a single vehicle in this raid, killing, I heard, 20, 40, 60, 80 people killed. And not a single U.S. troop was lost in this attack. We took their country's leader out, brought him to New York, and now he's going on trial for his crimes. That, to me, shows that we don't need what Dave Smith thinks. Dave Smith has no fucking idea what he's talking about when it comes to military action. He just guesses and then doubles down on his stupid guess. The only thing that this is going to require is putting a friendly actor in the position to lead the country, and they will oversee that for us. So that's really it. For him to make these stupid claims about how many troops it's going to take, there's no rooting in fact, and he has a proven track record of getting almost every single foreign policy issue wrong. including all the ones he quotes Scott Horton on. Scott Horton is a dishonest hack, and anyone that calls him out for it, he just gets nasty with. He's basically Destiny.
When we'll find out what he's going to do. But no, Pierce, the idea that we're 38 or maybe 39 by the end of the show, $1 trillion in debt right now. We have major problems in this country, and we have a hot war raging on in Europe, which is a proxy war between the entire West and the biggest nuclear armed power in the history of the world. The idea that we would go flirting with multiple wars of choice at this point, it's not left wing or right wing, it's just reckless. There's no wisdom in it.
Michael Knowles, I guess the argument against what Trump is doing is that many people who voted for Trump bought into the concept that what America first was take care of what's happening in your own backyard and stop meddling in foreign affairs. And now they're waking up almost on a daily basis to seeing Donald Trump proudly and aggressively talking about meddling in...
Before Michael Knowles has the chance to answer this, that guy in the middle, I can't remember his name right now, I really like him. I'd say out of everybody on this panel, he's probably who I side with the most politically. I can't remember his name right now. I knew it, it's just not on the tip of my tongue. That being said, America first does not mean America only. There was never part of it. Trump said early on before he was elected in his first term that we need to stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, we need to protect Israel, we need to take out our enemies on the foreign stage. He was the bomb the shit out of him guy. Trump, what are you going to do about terrorism? Bomb the shit out of him. What are you going to do about conflicts in the Middle East? Bomb the shit out of him. This idea that he was always a peacetime president when he was saying before he was even elected, we're going to bomb the shit out of our enemies. It's just retarded. He's a unilateralist. He does what is good for America on the world stage. Nation builder neocons don't like it. Isolationists don't like it. People like every culture is equal and deserves an equal say, and all we should do is give them incentives to grow into a civilized nation. People don't like it, but at the end of the day, it is America first. Unilateralism is the America first foreign policy. It's not isolationism. And anybody like Dave Smith who got that idea based off vague half sentences is just not paying attention. He basically just made the shit up. So it was never the way.
In all sorts of foreign affairs. Is there a contradiction or hypocrisy or even a betrayal of voters going on here?
Not at all. First of all, Venezuela is in our own backyard, and it's been the policy of the United States in 1803 to manage the Western Hemisphere. So that that's a cornerstone of American foreign policy. I think it is charming that Dave is defining America first in the way that he prefers, and I think there are plenty of people who wish to do that. But Dave, though a very popular podcaster, never won a presidential election, and Trump has been clear on what he means by America first, the political movement that he built, so that people voted for in his coalition since the beginning. President Trump campaigned the first time around on destroying ISIS. So obviously that does not mean that America's only going to look inward. President Trump has carried out attacks, military operations that were extremely successful in Iran, in Syria, and Afghanistan, obviously in Venezuela. He's been talking about taking Greenland and even invading America.
Well, we got 10 people in here. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, say something in chat, share it with your brother, share it with your sister, share it with your father and your friends. Just don't bother telling your mom, because I already fucking did. That hoe knows.
Evil Top Hat Canada, though I think he's mostly joking about that one, since the beginning. So that's what that means. And what it comes down to is that America is a global empire. We just are. People can be upset about that, but unless your geopolitics comes strictly from Reddit, if your geopolitics actually comes from history, you recognize that we've been an empire since the Louisiana Purchase, okay? And we've been a muscular global empire since the Second World War. So President Trump's vision, I think, actually rejects two extremes. It rejects a conservative isolationism, and it rejects liberal internationalism, and it posits a conservative imperialism that says that we are going to recognize our role in the world, but we are going to pursue that role in limited ways with America's interest at heart. So there's been no regime change in Venezuela. We're talking about regime change in Venezuela. The regime is still in place. What we did was depose the leader. We left the vice president in place, and we said, act in a way that is appropriate.
I feel like, after just listening to these introductions, I'm probably going to side with Michael Knowles out of everybody here because I'm an interventionist, I'm big into American hegemony, and I think the United States, based on its moral principle, is a superior nation to most blood and soil nations. So I like the fact that we're in charge of the world. It leads to a more peaceful world. I think almost every metric proves that. Not all of them. There's a couple decent counter-arguments there. I'm not going to pretend like it's 100% correct, but I feel like just based off the introductions here, I'm on Michael Knowles' side with this particular topic. Interventionism, good. Trump not doing anything unique. And this is America First policy to take out our enemies. Venezuela has been known to give passports to people in Hezbollah and other terrorist groups, other Iranian proxy terror groups, to get them to come into the U.S. to commit terror attacks from inside our country. We've caught them dozens of times. They've been doing it since Chavez. I think Chavez, the guy before Maduro. I'm blanking on names right now because I'm trying to keep the riz up. But yeah, I think I'm going to be siding with Knowles here because he's the most pro-public institution, pro-U.S. hegemony in this debate. No, Kyle Kulinski had a crash out in a tantrum and started yelling insult words because he didn't have a counter argument. We're about to get to that. I watched the clips, so we're going to get to that, but I want to give the full debate to make sure I give the full context.
In accordance with the law in our interest,
Hell
we're
yeah,
going to kill you.
that's right. Hit that fucking like button. Sub. Tell your brother. Tell your sister. Tell your brother. Tell your priest. Tell your fucking teacher. Just again, don't tell your mother. I'll take care of that. That hoe calls me.
That's very different than a Bushy-era neocon regime change in Iraq. Even when we're talking about Iran, the Trump administration has not gone in a particularly overt way yet. But even there, we would be talking about a restoration of the Pahlavi regime, most likely, that goes back to 1925. So I grant there are all sorts of risks.
I will disagree on one thing, his idea of regime change. Yes, we didn't go in and completely put in a new regime, but this is essentially regime change. He's trying to take a really, really literal stance on the definition. But the regime is represented by their leadership, and if you remove the leadership of the regime, and even if you leave the government stature in place and just put somebody else in, it is a regime change. I think he's being a little dishonest there.
To interventions, but we're the global empire, you know, and frankly, even the American Revolution comes out of wars of global empire. It comes out of the 7 Years' War, which itself was a derivation of the War of Austrian Succession. To pretend that we don't have a role in geopolitics is to ignore all of American history.
Okay, Carl Kulinski, I can see you grimacing through a lot of what Michael was saying there. You said Trump says the U.S. will run Venezuela and he threatens Colombia and Mexico, arrest...
Kyle's vagina got salty from that.
This psychotic motherfucker. Before I get you to expand on that thesis, I mean, the point I was making to Dave, if I want to elaborate on where I sit with this, because I've had a bit of time to look at this play out, is you look at Maduro. Everyone thought, my God, this is going to be World War III. Actually, Maduro's going to end up in a New York courtroom, and he's been got rid of. Everyone seems to agree that's a good thing for not just the Venezuelan people, but the world. No American troops died in what was an incredibly efficient surgical military strike to get him out of there. And if you have a more compliant leader of Venezuela, albeit part of the same regime, that can probably only be a good thing. If you look at the argument about Greenland, for example, I'd be struck by some of the people I didn't expect to think this was a good idea. There was a British general last week talking about this, saying that from a strategic security point of view, it would make perfect sense for America to have Greenland. And is there a deal to be done? He didn't think invading it would...
I think any person that's not anti-Trump brain would agree that it would be strategically in the benefit of the United States hegemony to take Greenland. I just don't like how he's doing it. The fact that he won't rule out troops doesn't mean he's going to invade Greenland. Anyone saying that to you is a liar. You should probably put him on mute and unsubscribe from them. Trump's not going to fucking invade Greenland. That's stupid. Stop being stupid. But yeah, as he said, people are saying every time Trump takes military action, you have people like Dave Smith saying, oh, it's going to cause World War III. And he's wrong every single time. Like when we hit Iran during the Israel-Iran war, the 12-day war. Oh, it's going to cause World War III. Iran's going to retaliate. None of that shit happened. And now Iran's about to collapse. The dude don't know what he's talking about. He just makes shit up.
Was the right thing, and nor do I. But is there a deal to be done with 60,000 people who live in Greenland that could actually improve the security of the United States and the West against the obvious threat from China and Russia and so on? And I can go through the others. Iran, getting rid of the Ayatollah and the mullahs is unquestionably a good thing for the world. It's how you do these things and whether you plan and prepare properly for what follows next that I think are the debatable points, and history says that's normally, unfortunately, been very badly done. But this is what I meant when I said to Dave that I understand the argument. I may not agree with all of it, but I do understand the logic to what Trump is doing here. Do you?
No, because we don't have a right to act like this.
Oh, okay, again, he can't even understand the logic. He has no basic empathy to even understand what somebody else is thinking that disagrees with him. Now, empathy arguments probably don't work on Dave Smith because he's on the right, but on the left, they're the ones that pretend to be the salt of the earth, feel other people's emotions, have more empathy, have more sympathy, be nicer. And then it's like, can you understand this person that disagrees with you, what they're even trying to say? No idea. I can't even figure out what they're trying to say. It's these people that want you to be an empath when they are probably the most self-centered people you've ever met.
Around the world. We're supposed to be a nation among nations, not a nation above nations. And they used to at least lie to us in the past and say, that this is good for the world and we're spreading freedom and democracy. Now they don't even bother to lie. Now it's naked, rank, disgusting imperialism where they say, we're going to take the oil. And the point is that we're going to take the oil. We're going to take the minerals. We're going to take the precious metals. We're doing this for our corporations. We're doing it for the Epstein class, the billionaires. And this, to piggyback on what Dave Smith said.
Jesus, I have to keep pausing, unfortunately. I'm sorry, because he's just gish-galloping half-truths. We are taking these things. The reason why we're taking the oil is because 30 years ago, we built their oil infrastructure. They had a bunch of oil underground that they couldn't get out with their sticks and stones and shitty government. We went in, we invested billions of dollars into their country, and then they seized it from us without paying us. After lawsuits, I think they recouped maybe 20% of the losses, these private companies, but for the most part, most of them have it. And the last president was trying to normalize the regime that stole 3 elections or 2 elections, depending on how you stand on those, at least 2 elections. The Biden administration was like, you know what? We don't care about stealing elections. We don't care that you're a communist dictator killing your political rivals. You should trade with us. We're going to normalize you. It's silly. Like, the idea that Trump's cozying up to dictators while this guy literally blows a dictator and says we shouldn't do anything against them. Like, it's every accusation from leftists is a confession. Kyle Kulinski is more than happy to leave a dictator who steals elections and oppresses his own people in power as long as he's on the right side of the aisle. But no, he's also taking the neocon argument. There was only one real major neocon president. It was George W. Bush. Only one ever. People use the term neocon for anybody that's pro-interventionist, but like it just ignores the fact that the right wing has generally been pro-interventionist, minus a tiny percent of paleocons that make up like 5 to 10% of the party. The right wing has been the interventionist party for 100 years, long before the neocons were incepted by Norman Pothoritz in the 70s. So,
it's frankly.
Did you got mad? What? You want to try that again?
Not what many of the MAGA voters thought they were signing up for. They thought America First actually meant America First. By the way, you also replaced the Maduro regime with the Maduro regime. Congratulations on that. It's also been now a week straight of pro-regime protests. Now you have roving gangs of Venezuelan militias that are kidnapping Americans. But again, I come back to the fundamental point, which is if you sign on to stuff like this, you're saying might makes right and the law of the jungle is back. What you're saying is China has a right to go into whatever smaller country they want and depose the leader and say we're doing it because we can and we have the right to do it and we have bigger guns.
So arresting a guy that's been committing terrorism, enabling terrorists, that stole tens of billions of dollars in U.S. infrastructure, going in and actually holding him accountable for his own actions is might makes right. That's stupid. This dude's an idiot. I'm sure he would love to see Trump arrested by like the world courts in the same exact way that we arrested Maduro. He would cheer it on. But when the right does it, it's evil. It's just, this is the hyper brain rot. At least Dave Smith is principled in his stances of being an idiot. Where Kyle Kulinski is just, when my side does it, it's perfectly acceptable. In fact, it's good. And when the other side does it, it's unacceptable and bad.
And there's nothing you can do to stop it. So they're never going to address that fundamental question, which is why do we have a right? Do we actually believe in international law, or was that all a joke? Are we rolling the clock back to the 1700s and the 1800s, and we're going super primitive style here? And I think the answer to that is yes, they want to go super primitive style.
Today's show is sponsored by Oxford Natural, makers of the Optimum Day and Optimum Night all-natural supplements.
International law goes back to antiquity. It's not some creation of modernity.
This is the clip.
Whether we're talking about the 1700s or the 20th century.
So Kyle Kulinski made a claim about international law. Michael Knowles is fact-checking that. Look how Kyle Kulinski responds to his substantive argument.
Conventions, the Nuremberg Tribunal, the Geneva Conventions and the Nuremberg Tribunal.
Yes, those exist, but international laws, the jus gentium goes back to antiquity. However, unfortunately, a lot of our liberal friends think history began a few decades ago.
The League of Nations was useless. It fell apart, and that's why we had the UN. That's why we had the Geneva Convention.
Right, I'm talking about millennia ago,
we looked at.
I've already addressed this. We're not taking Greenland. That you are following propagandists. Trump has just not ruled out a military. That's it. He's not saying we're going to invade Greenland. They literally offered $700 billion like a day or two ago. You're just falling for propaganda. Also, yes, Greenland would be a net benefit for the United States to take. In some way, shape, or form. I hope it's a purchase. More than likely it's going to be. We're not going to war with a fucking NATO ally. Stop being an idiot.
But it's true. Woodrow Wilson failed.
And we said that's a bad idea. We looked at piles of millions of dead bodies and said, that's a bad idea. Let's not do that anymore. Let's actually have a framework and rules and laws. And Trump is blowing that up. By the way, he bombed fishing boats from Venezuela, Trinidad, and Tobago, and Colombia. He just did the regime change in Venezuela. He bombed Yemen and Somalia and Nigeria and Iran. He's threatening Greenland and Panama and Canada and Cuba and Mexico. And you sit there the whole time and act like it's okay. Is there anything Trump can do, Michael Knowles, that you would say, I condemn it, and you hop off the Trump train?
So, again, his counter-argument first off starts off, here's a bunch of half-true facts. Now, is there anything Trump could do that you would say is bad? Completely ignoring his argument. His argument was, you were factually wrong about when international law started. It started back then. Kyle Kulinski brings up examples of international law that started after Michael Knowles claimed international law started and said, you're a Trump dick suck. So he's not responding to his argument, he's just insulting him. And now calling him basically a Trump cuck.
Or you're going to tickle his taint for the rest of your fucking life.
No, there have been plenty of Trump.
No, the U.S. does not have that right, and they're not going to. Stop falling for propaganda. Michael was trying to focus on when international law as a concept existed, while Kyle is talking about how international law has effectively kept us out since World War II. I mean, yes, but no. Like, there's been giant wars since World War II. The Cold War existed. The Cold War was several smaller wars that the United States has been involved in. We've been involved in massive conflicts with multiple fronts in the Middle East as well. There have been massive wars. There's been tons of wars since World War II. What we see since U.S. hegemony is less moving of borders. We see these conflicts resolve much more peacefully, much more quickly. Doesn't mean the wars don't start just as often. So Michael was hyper-focusing. No, Michael was fact-checking Kyle Kulinski being factually wrong. Kyle Kulinski made a claim of when international law started, he was wrong. Instead of saying, oh, maybe I got that wrong, he instead shifted the subject to Michael Knowles as a person. He was factually incorrect, and instead of saying, I got that wrong, he said, you love Trump. He shifted his argument to something else. Kyle Kulinski is crashing out.
Trump policies that I've criticized, because he's only right about 99.78% of the time. So the First Step Act, I thought, was a misstep. But I would say the rest. Excuse me. I would say the rest of the.
Now he's insulting him.
The administration has been very successful. What's your problem? What's
my problem is that you're a cuck and you're a hack and you're not an independent thinker and you're meat riding.
See here, more. Hey, Michael Knowles is giving him facts, fact-checking his claims, and Kyle's responding with personal insults. This is called crashing out. This is Kyle losing the argument and having a tantrum. And if you think insulting people when you can't address their points is winning an argument, I don't know what the fuck to tell you. It's kind of stupid, though.
Trump, and you know that what he's doing in imperialism, and you don't care.
I just answered your question. I corrected.
Congratulations. You rented your brain to a war criminal, pedophile, rapist. I hope you're happy.
A war criminal?
War criminal? Nothing of that is proven. They said the same thing about Biden. The Biden administration did an investigation into Gaza and Israel, and they found no proof that United States funding and backing of Israel was being used in war crimes. There was no proof of war crimes. The ICJ, the actual group with balls behind the UN, has still yet to call this a genocide and say Israel's complicit in war crimes. They did say that if they continued not allowing food into Gaza, when there was a dispute between the UN and Israel and the IDF on that particular front, that could potentially be a war crime or a human rights violation if continued. That's it. The ICJ has not said these things. Kyle just made that up. Pedophile. This is the Democrats going full QAnon to own Trump. There is no proof behind Epstein. There is still no proof behind Epstein, besides him and Ghislaine Maxwell and maybe a couple of co-conspirators. Maybe. The Invisible Man seems a little sus. There's nothing about Trump at all in there being with underage girls. Nothing. He is literally just making shit up. He's going full QAnon.
Criminal, pedophile, rapist?
And rapist. Rapist is the third one. He was civilly found liable for sexual abuse. If you look at the details of the case, there is no material evidence tying him to that. None. Rape is a federal crime. This is why when he sued ABC for this claim, they just settled and paid him tens of millions of dollars because there's no fact behind it. So Kyle is making shit up to smear Michael Knowles, to smear Trump, because he can't address the fact that he got something factually wrong and Michael Knowles corrected him. Yes, I did see that. I watched the first debate because I've debated both Ryan Mullally and Pisco. I can honestly say Ryan, I don't think I've ever beaten him in a debate, but I've held my own. Pisco, I debated him one time. I won so hard he won't even speak to me again.
You brought up international law, and you made a very false point, a dumb point, which is that international law began only a few hundred years ago. I corrected you, and I pointed out that the international law is part of the Western tradition. Excuse me one second. It goes back to antiquity. It's a principle of the jus gentium. And then you said, well, international law has failed because of the League of Nations failure, which I think is actually undermining your argument and proving my point and proving Trump's point, because the liberal internationalism that was established by people like Woodrow Wilson did in fact fail, which is why we need to restore an older and more classical conception of the international order, which is precisely what Trump's doing. So I think you've hoisted yourself with your own petard. And then you just make a lot of vulgar sort of non sequiturs because you don't have a leg to stand on.
All right.
You know what? I like Michael Knowles' decorum here. He's not insulting back. He's sticking to the point. He's calling Kyle out for ignoring that he got something factually wrong and then just reverting to personal attacks against Michael Knowles and Trump when he gets called out for being factually incorrect.
All right, let me bring in...
Let me ask you this question. Piers, let me ask him a question real quick. Tell me the name of the Minister of Defense in Venezuela.
Kyle's crashing out. He wants to take over the show because he's angry. He lost a fucking back and forth with Michael Knowles.
Well,
I don't know. Whatever his name
is. And that's a problem. You're advocating for a regime change. You don't know the first thing.
I didn't. I just said the opposite. I argued against the regime change.
He actually said the opposite. I heard Michael Knowles.
I just want to correct.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so Kyle's not wrong here, but he's not putting it together. He's not giving the proper stepping stones of the argument. You have to first disprove that this is a regime change. And if you look at previous regime changes, sometimes that's just removing the current government from power, leaving the exact structure of the government in place, all the bureaucrats in place, just removing the partisans that are in power and putting another partisan group in power that's more agreeable to the United States. That's what regime change is, and that's essentially what we did there. So it is technically at least a soft regime change, and Kyle is right here, but he's so angry he can't even make that argument right now. He's just kind of sounds like he isn't listening to Michael Knowles, and Michael Knowles is right for calling him out. He needed to have that discussion first, but he's so upset and crashing out, he can't do that.
I heard Michael Knowles say the regime remains there, right? So he said the opposite, in fact. I want to bring in Coleman.
No, but he wanted to take out Maduro. Don't give me that cutesy little...
Yes, but he made the point that the regime is still... He made the point the regime is still there, and the vice president appears to be much more compliant with running Venezuela the way...
Well, he did make that point, and instead of arguing it, Kyle actually sided with it and saying you took out Maduro and you left Maduro. So he's essentially agreeing to Michael Knowles' false premise, but still calling it a regime change. He's just so dumb. He doesn't realize that he undercut an argument he made 5 minutes ago.
America would prefer for its national security than Maduro. So that's what Michael said. He didn't advocate regime change. Let me bring in Coleman Hughes. Coleman,
kidnapping the president is
hang on, Carl. Let me bring in regime change. Coleman hasn't said a word yet. Coleman, what's interesting about you, I think, with this is you've been, I think, striving to be quite nuanced with your take on all this stuff that's going on. And that's kind of where I found myself, is that sometimes taking a beat, looking at it from just a step away, and trying not to be too knee-jerk about all these things, often can be beneficial to your mental health, but actually can probably better, I think, represent what is really going on here. You know, everyone wants to go to extremes very, very quickly about everything and take a very tribal position. I've been struck by your, I think, quite intellectually honest attempt to be more nuanced. So what do you think about all this?
Thank you, Piers. I try to not think about these issues in terms of left versus right or Trump versus the opposition and try to take each issue on its own terms. So let's do that. Venezuela. If the policy here is actual regime change, in other words, not just decapitating Maduro and replacing Maduro with a second worst alternative, if we were to actually affect regime change in Venezuela, that would almost certainly be a good thing for the people of Venezuela and for American interests. Now, if we're going to do this half measure where we just decapitate Maduro and replace him with someone just as bad and then get a bunch of oil, well, that would at best be probably neutral for the Venezuelan people. It would be an enormous waste of U.S. military resources, and I would be very critical of the Trump administration. The truth is, I don't know which path we're going down, right? It's very early.
Right.
We're getting different signals from Trump depending on the day, different signals from Rubio, and anyone who's confidently prognosticating that they know.
I don't think Rubio's giving... Trump is giving some mixed signals, saying things like, we're running that country now and things like that. But I think Rubio has been very clear. We're putting a person in place that's not Maduro, that's going to allow an actual fair election to take place, and then we'll go from there. We're just taking him out of power, and we're going to let him do a do-over where they don't have somebody that rigs elections running the elections anymore. So I think that's... He's right to call Trump out for talking out of both sides of his mouth, but not Rubio. Rubio's been fairly good on this subject.
Which path we're going down probably doesn't know what they're talking about. As for Greenland, I think the truth is Trump is extraordinarily reckless in his rhetoric here. We have a situation where we have an ally in Denmark, a NATO ally. We have deep relationships with Greenland already. We have a military base, we have mineral connections. And so the idea of taking Greenland by force against the will of the people who live there is absolutely ridiculous. Now, that said, If we were to purchase it, I think that'd be a good thing. It'd have to happen with their consent. They would have to want it.
Right.
And I would welcome them as an American, but we absolutely cannot take it by force.
Right. See, that to me, Dave Smith, is part of the interesting part of all this, is that it's how this plays out. It's what actually Trump really wants to do. If he doesn't I mean, take, for example, what China's been doing.
They may use coercion, though. They may not take it by force, but they may use forms of coercion like tariffs or different market pressures. If the United States wants it and we want to put the fucking clamps on their economy, we are fully able to do that. And I don't know if I'd agree with it or disagree with it. Like, it's we bought the Virgin Islands from Denmark less like 100 years ago. This isn't anything unprecedented. It's actually very similar, except they kind of wanted to sell us that because they were economically hurting. So
doing in Africa for the last 20 years. It's been going around Africa pretty quietly, actually, unless you're actually in Africa. And it's been doing endless commercial deals with African countries where they go in, they spend a lot of money on infrastructure and hospitals and bridges and roads and all these things. And in return, they get access to huge amounts of minerals. And that's been going on for 20 years. And that's a kind of economic imperialism. I see no ideological difference between that and what Trump is potentially talking about with Greenland, which is clearly incredibly important.
All right. The only thing I disagree with here is that's not imperialism. If China's going around and saying we're going to give you $1 billion to help you build infrastructure in your country and you have to exclusively trade rare earth minerals with us, that's a partnership. That's a trade deal. That's an economic partnership. That's not imperialism. We need to fight back on that. But what we were doing was instead putting $20 billion into a country so we could build a trans theater in their capital instead of building them roads and hospitals and things of that nature. So I think Pierce is right here that the United States should pivot and actually try to help these countries with real infrastructure, not push our gender politics on them. But at the end of the day, he's 100% right. We need to push back against it. And the way Trump's doing it is we saw it with Canada and Mexico. Canada and Mexico wouldn't stop taking this cheap oil. They were getting steel. Chinese steel was being dumped into Canada, dumped into Mexico, and then used to dodge tariffs on China, used to dodge sanctions, and using NAFTA to flood that steel into our country, undermining our steel industry. China was undervaluing this steel intentionally to outsell our steel markets, hurting our national steel industry, propping theirs up. So absolutely, we should fight back fire with fire if they're going to do things like that.
Strategically, from a security point of view, from a mineral point of view, and so on. And there are only 60,000 people who live there, and it may well be that they're happy to do a deal if the price is right, in which case, what's the difference?
Yeah, well, I'll say I pretty much agree with Coleman, I guess, on that. Like, if it's voluntary, then okay. I don't really know enough about Greenland to really speak on it intelligently, but I could not disagree more with the take on Venezuela.
You don't know enough about anything to speak on it intelligently. That's never stopped you before.
And I think it's crazy, Pierce. I also think, it just after the last 25 years, and I'm not saying they're exactly the same, but the idea that we're just talking about regime changes in Iran and Venezuela and saying it would undoubtedly be a good thing if this regime were to fall. Well, maybe, but there's a really important question of what comes next. And if you want to say that, we've had a long history of regime changes in Latin America that have been disastrous too. We overthrew a communist government in the 50s in Guatemala, led to a civil war where hundreds of thousands of people died. So the idea that it's a guarantee that it would be a good thing if either one of these regimes fell, we certainly don't know that. And one of the other things we know is that you really don't get much of a say in what replaces the regime that falls unless you're willing to militarily occupy the country.
He's basically making the argument for neocon nation building without even realizing it. He's saying, like, either we bury our heads in the sand and let our neighbors ally with our enemies, or we do nation building. Where there's other options, absolutely, and I do think Trump's is very risky to just go in there and say, you're bad, we're taking you out of power, let the chips fall where they may. I think he's got a solid point there that actually helps the neocons more than it helps the libertarians.
Right. And we've had regime change. We might be able to affect a full regime change without a military occupation, as we did in Libya, as we did in Syria. But, those are not great examples where the country worked out. I mean, Syria is hanging on by a hair, and Libya is an absolute catastrophe. And
Syria is normalizing. They're fucking trying to join the Abraham Accords and shit. Like, they're not hanging on by a hair. And honestly, the funding for that was Qatar and Turkey. The United States had CIA assets aiding them in there, and that's about it. It was Qatar and Turkey that overthrew Syria.
So it's just like, it's very reckless when you start playing. You start dropping bombs on human beings, you start toppling governments, you start kidnapping or taking, leaders of countries. There's unintended consequences that come with all of these things. That's probably the one lesson in all of this military history, is that nobody is smart enough to predict exactly what's going to come next. And so I just think it's, I see this with the...
Nobody knows, but that's why every time he makes a prediction, he's drastically wrong. The consequences of us dropping bunker busters in Iran, he said it would be World War III, that Iran would attack our country, they'd destroy our country, we'd see terrorist attacks springing up everywhere. What's happened since? Iran's collapsing as a nation because of its own people and the pressures against it from the United States government. All of Iran's 5 proxy states have lost a war, and their own countries are forcing them out. Yemen's working with the United States and Israel to force out the Houthis. Lebanon's working with the United States and Israel to disarm Hezbollah. 60 nations, mostly Arab nations, signed on to Trump's peace plan to demilitarize and disarm Hamas in Gaza. So it's actually working, and working well. So I don't know. He was wrong about all that.
The situation in Iran, I say Michael Knowles are there. It's like, guys, it's like you hoist up the mission accomplished banner 2 days after the strike. We have absolutely no idea what's going to come of this. Obviously, in the situation in Iran, just right in front of all of our eyes, Pierce, what? The goalposts have moved from 60% enriched uranium, which is what me and Coleman were arguing about a few months ago. That's out the window now, right? And nobody even cares about or is pretending there's a nuclear threat. Donald Trump's bragging about how it's obliterated. Then both Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump moved the goalpost to intercontinental ballistic missiles, and then that was the war propaganda for a couple months there. Now it's over whether they shoot protesters or rioters. Not even like an accusation that they're committing a genocide or...
He's saying it's a shifting goalpost, but it's not. These are different legitimate issues. We bombed their nuclear facilities, so that 60% uranium is now off the table. Problem solved. Then Israel in the 12-day wars destroyed almost half of their ICBM launchers, destroyed the manufacturing for their missiles and drones, destroyed fucking manufacturing for energy that goes to China. The missiles and drones go to Russia to fight against Ukraine. Like, we solved these problems and moved on to the next problem. It's not a shifting goalpost. It's different, legitimate problems.
Or a threat to another country, they invaded their neighbor, nothing like that. So I would just say, I think one of the most important lessons, and Michael, who's a history buff, would know that every last one of the founders of this country talked about this all the time, is that you want to be sober and calm and rational. You want to not intervene when you don't need to. There's all types of unintended consequences that can come from these things. And that's why the advice of the founders was, be friends with the world, don't get into entangling alliances, don't search for monsters to destroy, to fight unnecessary wars. These are all wars of choice.
The United States went after Barbary pirates just a couple decades after its inception. These are necessary wars. He just doesn't understand why they're necessary.
Well, speaking of the founders and the American relation to foreign affairs, what was our first big international war? Was it the Iraq War? Was it the Gulf War?
You're talking about the Barbary pirates or whatever. I don't know.
You're right. I'm talking about 1801. And it was actually our founding fathers who waged that war.
Okay, but Dave,
it goes back to
Jefferson waged the war. Whatever. We don't have real time to get into that. But sure, we got 5 wars here.
We have plenty of time, but you don't want to get into it because it undercuts your argument.
No, I'm happy. Michael, if you want to come on my podcast, I'll do 2 hours on the Barbary Wars with you. The point is that we're trying to talk about the 5 conflicts going on right now.
Sure. Okay, let me address the Venezuela point.
Sure. Let me see. Coleman might have something smart to say.
Yeah. So you're totally right. There is always a risk to regime change, and I don't mean to downplay that. But you have to factor in there is a risk to letting...
Michael Knowles is on point here. Again, it's probably because he's espousing my personal worldview about interventionism and U.S. hegemony here, but he's on point. Dave Smith was factually wrong. And then as soon as he brings it up, I don't want to get into that. Let's just move on.
Rogue regimes that, for instance, in the case of Venezuela, invite Hezbollah into the country, buy weapons from all of our adversaries, Iran, China, Russia, etc. A regime that has literally run this country, which used to be one of the wealthier countries in Latin America, into the ground, to the point that people are literally eating wildlife. They're breaking into zoos, eating cats and dogs because this regime has totally destroyed the country. There is a risk to allowing a country like that to just continue doing whatever it's going to do. And so the idea that inaction has no risk is one thing I want to flag as a false argument. And the second thing I want to say is you're quick to...
Get him. Get him.
Reach for analogies to the Middle East, and I understand that. I mean, the American public has been really has lost so much faith in the American political class because of our interventions in the Middle East. And the lesson I think you've drawn and other people have drawn is that therefore regime change is always wrong. I don't think that that's the right lesson. I mean, to me, that's analogous to taking the lesson from World War II that regime change is always right because it worked in Japan and Germany. The truth is, it's different depending on the situation on the ground. In most of the Middle, we're talking about Iraq, Syria, Yemen. You're talking about deeply sectarian countries with deep division.
What he's saying here in simpler terms is, if you're pro regime change, you only look at the positives, and if you're against it, you only look at the negatives. And honestly, it's more of a case-by-case basis. He's arguing against collectivism versus individualism. He's arguing the liberal principles. This guy's a Chad.
Visions, countries that are essentially civil wars waiting to happen if the lid comes off. Venezuela is not a country like that. Again, the risk is not zero, but it's not a sectarian country. It was a functioning country for a very long time, and so the risk of civil war type outcomes like Syria and Iraq is just much lower than it is in the Middle East.
So what about
can I respond to that?
Hang on.
What is Syria? All we did was drop some bombs in Syria. We were working with Assad at one point. We let Russia go in there and take out Aleppo because we didn't want to. We never did that to Syria. Other people did that to Syria. So bringing Syria up as an example is wild because that civil war started before we got there. All we did was send CIA assets in to train the people that were fighting against our enemies. We didn't start that. We just aided.
Hang on.
Yes, please.
Hang on. I want to just center it, actually, just on this point. Just bring it right up to date with Iran, Coleman, if I may. Because, depending on who you listen to, there's a revolution going on driven by the people to depose an incredibly unpopular regime that's been there since 1979. Are we seeing the potential for civil war there? Are we seeing a revolution that should happen organically without any interference or aid?
Now, Pierce is right. These particular protests and riots have been going on since 2022. The only reason you didn't hear about them is because the last administration was trying to normalize trade with Iran and Venezuela, trying to bring them into the world stage full, trying to say these are legitimate governments and we want to trade with them, we want to normalize relations with them. And it really bombed the Biden administration hard. Even Democrats were coming out and saying, no, absolutely not. This guy steals elections, murders political adversaries. He's an awful person that treats his people poorly. Like, this is not somebody you want to do trade with and remove sanctions from. The Biden administration was trying to make them our friend.
Trump right to say we're going to stand up for protesters who want freedom and democracy against a tyrannical regime and so on? In other words, all the things that we've been discussing about other scenarios, let's bring it to Iran. What's your view of what's happening there?
Well, Iran is, I think it's, you're asking me, Pierce?
Yeah.
I think we should support the opposition. Absolutely. I don't think we should put boots on the ground. I think I agree with Dave. Our record in the Middle East recently, I think, precludes that for many reasons, just practical reasons. But we absolutely should support the opposition. Iran was a country that was a semi-functional democracy for a very long time. In a lot of ways, it's a more coherent country, a more coherent body politic than Iraq, Syria, and Yemen, et cetera. So I think the odds of success for a revolution there are higher, but that's not saying much considering that the region is extremely volatile to begin with. So I totally support the opposition. I want to see the Islamic regime go down on their terms, and we should do what we can to support that, short of full-scale military intervention.
Okay, Michael Knowles, what do you feel about Iran?
Come on, Pierce, let me respond to that.
Okay, I'll come to you, Michael.
Yeah.
All right, Dave, you respond, then we'll come to Michael.
Well, yeah, because I mean, there's just so much there. And like, look, I mean, even if you're going to say that, like, well, we have a bad track record of regime change in the Middle East, I mean, I think I've made this point. I think I saw your point coming. That's why I said, yeah, we also have a terrible track record of regime change in Central and South America. And that's why I gave the example of Guatemala. We can look at Nicaragua. We can look at all types of different interventions that just got a whole lot of people killed and didn't do anything for the people or for the country. And Coleman, yeah, fair enough. There's a risk to inaction the same way there's a risk to action, but the risk to action is to our boys and our budget and bankrupting our country. And so it's just a totally different risk that you take on when you intervene than when you don't. And I got to say, Coleman, these are the same arguments that were used in Iraq. What you said about what you said about Venezuela and Iran. This is why the neocons said we were going to be greeted as liberators. Chalabi had assured them that the people hated Saddam and they were going to be pro-American. And you said there's not sectarian conflict in Venezuela. I mean, Venezuela, no, of course there is. It's the mixed European elite class and then the majority of natives. And that's who Chavez and Maduro always carried. At least I know in Chavez's election, that was always his base. And I agree with you, man. Like,
Maduro has like 25% support in the country, so he's, again, back factually incorrect here. And he's trying to make these parallels, but like what Coleman Hughes said is we're not going to put boots on the ground. This is going to be an organic regime change from within the country because the people don't want it.
It is true that that government has ruined that country. I am not, I hate socialism as much, if not more, than anybody on this panel. But the thing is, like, it was a communist government in Guatemala too. And the civil war that killed hundreds of thousands of people there didn't make it better for them. And so I just think that, like, the idea that we're so confident we should back the resistance in Iran. Well, we also had regime changes in that region that didn't require like huge numbers of boots on the ground, and they were catastrophes too. And to hear you guys talk about the most likely thing is that, you know, because now you understand we have to spread hereditary monarchy. We're not bringing democracy anymore. The idea that the Shaw's kid is going to walk in there and take power. I say, of all the crazy things Donald Trump has said, that was one thing that I think he got right. Yeah, I don't think he's got the juice. And the options of what would arise in either of these conflicts, there's at least a strong possibility that there'd be tons of conflict and a worse government, if not just as bad a government at the end of the day.
Okay, Michael Knowles, the latest poly market odds on Iran, US.
So what he's saying is there's a chance it could be just as bad as it is now, so don't do anything because there's a small chance it could be as bad as it is now. That's his argument. Like, we can't try to help because there's a small risk it could end up just as bad even if we try to help. That's not an argument.
Test strikes 77%
That's
likelihood. Khomeini, the Ayatollah, out by the end of January, I think is now up to 24%. Fall of the Iranian regime by 2028, 47%. So the money is moving in the predictive world to suggesting that this is the beginning, as the Chancellor of Germany says, this is the beginning of the end of that regime. But we have been on this rodeo a few times in Iran, and it's been brutally repressed in the past. What do you think is going to happen here? And in terms of that point Dave makes, when things happen organically, you know, the fall of the Berlin Wall, we all remember watching that and how good that felt. And it didn't need outside.
That didn't happen organically. That took the Cold War. The entire Cold War, us containing and fucking fighting with the communists who are outspending the United States by almost triple. China and Russia, when they were communists in the Cold War, were outspending the United States by almost triple. They were going into more countries than we were and forcibly converting them to communism, and then they collapsed under their own weight because the United States fought a 30-year Cold War against them, not organically.
Direct military intervention.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. No, that happened organically. The United States didn't have anything to do with it.
Is it not better for America to sit back and watch the Iranian people determine their own future in the way that appears to be happening than potentially cause mayhem by directly interfering on their behalf?
Well, I think those are two separate points, and I think my friends on this panel are taken with a lot of abstract ideology, whether it's libertarianism or leftism. I'm a little more interested in practical politics. So what I think is most important here is that Iran remains orderly and does not descend into total chaos. Iran is a real country with more of a unified history, and also that the Iranian people do better. Obviously, the Islamic Revolution was terrible for them. It destroyed their material conditions, led to a huge erosion of their rights and liberties. And so it's worth remembering that the policy of the United States has been for regime change in Iran since 1979. So the Iranians have been undermining our interests all around the world for a very long time, not just looking at the recent Iraq war where they killed over 600 Americans, but going all the way back to the 1983 Beirut barracks bombings, going back to the attack on U.S. troops in Saudi Arabia in 1996. I think we would all agree, I hope we're all mature enough to agree, that nations have interests, especially when you are a major power or a hegemonic power as the United States. We have interests around the world. Dave keeps pointing to his displeasure over one intervention in Guatemala. The United States has intervened for 150 years, 88 times in Latin America. It's usually worked out very well. Sometimes it hasn't worked out well, but what would have been worse is if we had let, during the Cold War, the Soviets get a hold in Latin America. What is worse is allowing communists to run roughshod.
That's the perfect argument for Dave Smith. Dave Smith only looks at the negatives of what was done and doesn't take into consideration anything else as to like his eyes. Bury your head in the sand, ignore that communists are taking over nations right next door to us. If the Cuban Missile Crisis happened and Dave Smith's party was in charge, they'd say, it's fine, they're just putting nukes on our border and aiming them right at us. Ignore it. Bury your head in the sand and be a coward.
The perspective of the people there, as well as from the interests of the United States.
New Year is all about starting afresh, and today's sponsor will help you to do exactly that. Mando Whole Body Deodorant is created by doctors and which I thought was a powerful one. If America looks like it's just ignoring international law, if it thinks it can just go into Venezuela, kidnap the president, put him in a courtroom in New York, act with impunity, take Greenland if it wants, etc., etc., what is to stop America's enemies using the exact...
This is what America did to Saddam Hussein. This is what George Bush did to Panama. This has happened dozens of times in human history. Like, fucking the former president of the Philippines is currently sitting in prison right now in The Hague for the exact same thing. So it's not ignoring international law, it is international law. But he's making a hypothetical here. He's taking the fear mongering about Greenland and he's forming it into a question. So I get what he's doing. I just don't like the narrative he is setting up to ask this question.
Exact same argument to do what the hell they like. For example, Vladimir Putin must be sitting there going, well, hang on, every argument about why I invaded Ukraine, that's just gone up in smoke, isn't it? I mean, it's the same argument. I wanted to do it. It's in my national security interest. You've got the President Xi probably looking at it going, well, why can't I take Taiwan then? If the Americans can take Greenland because it's in their national security interest, then I want Taiwan. And how difficult does it then become for the West and America leading the West to take any high moral ground or to stop it happening in any way if they've already trampled on international law themselves?
I think that first of all, I disagree with the premise, but second of all, I think my ideological friends on this panel seem to be quite mistaken about a basic premise here, which is they seem to believe that the United Nations or something is what keeps our enemies from running roughshod over the world, American interests and other people's. That's not true. You know what stops?
The reason why Putin made the comments that Ukraine is a nation of Nazis doing illegal things is because it's unpopular to just go in and invade a nation like that. He might be lying, but it's the reason he made that argument up. Like, China doesn't have that leg to stand on. They don't have the moral argument of Taiwan is oppressing its people, killing political rivals, and locking up political opposition. They don't have that argument. So if China went in the same way we went in and took Maduro out, they wouldn't have the moral high ground. They wouldn't have the reasoning. It's like saying going into somebody's house and kidnapping them is the same as the police arresting you. It's just a brain-dead argument. And I get he's setting up a hypothetical here. Pierce is doing an interview. He doesn't probably believe that, but it's a fair question to ask Knowles, I guess. I just don't like it.
Our enemies, we do. The might of the United States is what stops us. Now, the reason I disagree with your fundamental premise is I don't think that we violated international law in the removal of Maduro. First of all, the Monroe Doctrine, now the Donroe Doctrine, has been the cornerstone of American foreign policy, basically since the beginning. But two, there was a legal predicate for the removal of Maduro that goes back to a court order in 2020, and this has really gone back about 25 years now. Let us not forget it was the Biden-Harris administration and Tony Blinken, the Secretary of State, who called for the arrest of Maduro and actually offered $25 million to anyone who could advance it. So the only difference between the Republican action here and what the Democrats called for just 1 year ago is that Trump was actually able to do it, and he saved $25 million doing
Why
it. So
but by that logic...
Hold on, when did Biden do that? That I actually don't know. Let me go rock that real quick. When... Let's check. When did Biden call for the arrest of Maduro? Was it before or after he tried to trade oil with them? Oh, it looks like somebody else is... Let's take a look. So they did that right before they left office on January 10th, 2025, after like a year of trying to work with them. Biden administration pursued policies of sanction relief for Venezuela in order to get Venezuela to trade with them. Yeah, so from 2022 to mid-2024, the Biden administration was trying to normalize trade with Iran, remove sanctions from them, and bring them into the fold of the world stage. And then right before they left office, they said, actually, no, Venezuela bad. It was like a last thing they did right out the door after spending years trying to work with them. So I kind of see it as saving face, but it does help Knowles' point a little bit here. I just don't like it. I think it's a little disingenuous because I don't think the Biden administration really wanted Maduro out if they spent 2.5 years trying to work with them.
The argument.
But
That's
by
the
that,
argument that Trump got
logic,
Biden's policy done.
Well, by that logic, Michael, why should President Xi not be able to go into Taiwan and take the leader and put him in a Chinese courtroom? By that logic.
Can I address that, Piers?
He's got no answer, Piers.
I'm happy to answer.
Well, let Michael
answer.
Stop interrupting before. Yes. So the only reason that Xi has not gone into Taiwan so far is because the United States has told Xi not to. From the point of international law, there is also another confusion, because international law is a real thing. Many of my fellow conservatives want to pretend that there is no such thing as international law and that might merely makes right, but that's not true. Law is an ordinance of reason, so we can actually know something about it, and it objectively exists even though it's not material. However, what passes for international law these days, specifically over the last 100 or so years, is a bunch of liberal gobbledygook nonsense, which even my friend here, Kyle Kulinski, points out doesn't work, which is why the League of Nations failed and the UN has largely failed. So there is such a thing as natural law, but it is effected through political powers. And right now, the only thing stopping Xi from going into Taiwan, the only thing that has stopped Vladimir Putin from running roughshod over Ukraine is not some abstract concept in the clouds. It's the might of the United States empire and our allies around the world, and that is what will continue to stop them.
Well, I don't think
that they don't have the moral high ground to, because Iran or Taiwan is not doing the things to its people. It's not violating international law against its own people the way Maduro in Venezuela has for 20 years.
Carl, I will bring you in now, but I don't think that it has stopped Putin running roughshod over Ukraine. He just invaded it.
He hasn't taken the country yet.
Well, he invaded it, took as much as he could, but the Ukrainians have put up a much bigger fight than he thought they could. But I don't think Putin's intentions have been remotely thwarted. I don't think America.
Well, he only invaded because of Biden. So frankly, had Trump stayed, I don't think he would have even invaded. But it's true. He was able to run some roughshod over it during Joe Biden. But there was no floating international law. Let's not forget, he invaded before the supposedly awful attack on Venezuela.
But he has. I mean, look. But the thing is, Michael, Putin has continued to act with total impunity in Ukraine, regardless of anything Donald Trump has said publicly, either in a friendly or unfriendly manner. He doesn't seem to care. I think if Putin could take the whole of Ukraine tomorrow, he'd take it. I think that's always been his ambition.
That's my point, I guess. That's my point. I don't think that America's very successful strike on Venezuela is going to do one thing. Now, it will not change one iota of Putin's calculation.
No, but that's my point. My point to you is that when it comes to Taiwan,
highly disagree with that. Venezuela, that tanker that was seized was being tailed by a Russian sub. That Russian sub and that ship that apparently doesn't belong to anybody was making Russia money. Russia and Iran and China have been using Venezuela to dodge sanctions, dodge tariffs, and still take in goods that they absolutely need to fund their wars and fuel their economy. It will change their calculation. This is the third state that is an ally with Russia that is either about to collapse or in the middle of collapsing. Iran being one, Syria being the other one, and now Venezuela. So Russia is hurting on the world stage. The Trump's foreign policy is isolating Russia on the world stage and putting them in a worse position.
I'm not sure that American power is the limiting factor for the calculations by people who run countries like Russia and China that you seem to think it is. Because I think Xi will have looked at Ukraine and thought, well, what's America actually done to stop Putin taking as much as he can?
Do you think that international law is going to limit Chairman Xi?
Well, no, I don't know. I do think the concept of international law has been twisted and torn apart so badly that I'm actually uncertain what it really means anymore. Because people don't seem to. I mean, if you look at what Israel's done in Gaza, I would say they've trampled over international law with utter impunity, and they don't care.
Reasonable minds can differ, but I agree that's a good point on the murkiness of international law.
Yeah, okay, Kyle.
Yeah, well, I mean, I find this whole conversation preposterous because the idea that we're the moral arbiter of anything is honestly laughable. Trump is himself a criminal. He was best friends with Jeffrey Epstein. He's covering for a billionaire pedophile cabal as we speak. We armed and funded a genocide in Gaza. We also armed and funded a genocide committed by Saudi Arabia in Yemen. If there's any country on earth...
That's true. They were starving out the Yemenis, people that weren't involved with the Houthis as well. So that one's got a little bit of bearings to it. He made one salient point.
Where there's some semblance of a sound argument to do regime change. It's our regime being changed. So I don't want to open the door to this might makes right, law of the jungle nonsense. And everybody else except Dave, seemingly on the panel, is in favor of that.
Michael Knowles already denounced the might makes right argument in his last statement. Kyle just ignored it because if he had to listen to the arguments he's arguing against, he has no fucking point. He's just making shit up.
But America has a mechanism. Kyle, hang on. America has a mechanism for regime change. It's called the election every 4 years. And the truth is, Americans had a good, long, hard look at
You're making my point.
Well, no, I'm not.
This is my point.
I'm not.
Yes, you are.
I'm saying you live in a free democratic society with free democratic elections. That's why Trump won in 2016. That's why he lost in 2020, whatever he wants people to think. And that's why he won again in 2024. That is regime change, how it should happen.
We back 73% of the world's dictatorships. The idea that we say, here's a dictator we don't like, we're going to overthrow them, is ridiculous. By any objective standard, Netanyahu is worse than Maduro, and we're not overthrowing him.
Absolutely not. Any standard? He's putting his political rivals in jail. He's killing his political opposition in the streets. Absolutely not. Again, the United States in 2014, under the Biden administration, The State Department did an investigation into allegations of war crimes and human rights violations, as well as the ICJ has still backed Israel has not committed a war crime and could commit a human rights violation if they didn't start bringing food to Gaza in like 2023. And that ended a few months later. That's it. That's fucking it. They are allowed to hit hospitals if you use those hospitals as military staging grounds. Israel is not violating international law. They are not committing a genocide. Kyle's just making shit up, and he's doing it to simp for the dictators he likes.
So the whole conversation is absurd. We're in no position to be the world police or the moral arbiters. In fact, Trump himself literally says this is about the oil. It's about the natural resources. It's about stealing that for the corporations and the billionaires. So the whole conversation about,
well, I think it could be. I actually think I think Venezuela can be about a number of things at the same time. That's why I think nuance is an important factor in these things. It can be
but
part.
That's the
hang on, Kyle.
Can it just be pointed out?
It can be about oil. It can be about oil. It can be about Maduro being a gangster. It can be about a number of things.
This was
Trump's a
sold
gangster.
to us.
Trump's a gangster.
All right.
Trump bad.
Isn't it funny that we have this whole conversation, and while you're saying it could be about all these things, you know what no one's bringing up? Drugs. And that's what it was sold to us as.
Right.
Just like all these other wars, they just lie through their teeth. It has nothing to do with the drug problem, or a tiny fraction of it, and nothing to do with the fentanyl problem, which is the real crisis. It's a total pretext for war. And you know, I gotta say, man, by the way, I kind of agree with Michael on the concept of international law. But the thing about it is that this is totally illegal by our own law, by the Constitution of the United States of America, which every politician puts their hand on a Bible and swears before all of us to God that they will do everything in their power to defend and execute. There was no imminent attack here. Donald Trump had all the time in the world to go to Congress and get permission for this, and he just didn't want to. You know, and if you want to just say like,
that's not what the Wartime Powers Act in 1970 says. He's just making shit up.
By the way, Mike, it's funny because you point out I'm a libertarian or Kyle's a leftist. Ironically, we're the only ones taking the conservative position here on this. We are not an empire. Actually, the Supreme, yes, that's actually right. There's a long tradition. Do you know your history on this?
There's a long tradition of libertarians telling conservatives what we believe. And I'm sick of it for one.
No. There's a long tradition of the best conservatives having the exact same foreign policy I do, and then a bunch of former communists who were atheists convinced you guys that it was right wing to support wars everywhere. By the way, the Monroe Doctrine.
They convinced Thomas Jefferson in 1801.
No,
the right wing has always been the pro-war party of the United States. Dave Smith is making the communists convinced you war was right before communism was even a fucking major thing. Dude, he's just fucking stupid.
I don't know about that. No. I'm not talking about the Barbary Wars. Okay, anyway.
Or the Monroe administration or the Roosevelt administration.
Do you even know what the Monroe Doctrine is? You say the Monroe Doctrine means that we get to run our...
You did the pop quiz. You don't know what this thing is that I'm not going to define.
Hemisphere? No, it doesn't.
No,
Monroe Doctrine.
We keep our
Michael, let me finish a thought, and then you can respond to it. No, that's not actually true. It meant that Europe couldn't have any more colonies here, and in turn, we wouldn't interfere in Europe. By the way, it's not a law. It's something a president said once in a speech, and it hasn't been the cornerstone of our foreign. It hasn't been. Have we not interfered in Europe? Have we not interfered?
It's not a law. Laws are made by Congress. Presidents look at the laws and interpret them. Presidents have a whole slew of other powers, and the executive branch does different things besides laws. Laws are what Congress do. Dave doesn't understand how government works, doesn't understand how foreign policy works, and doesn't understand the role of the executive. He needs to go back and read the Constitution because he doesn't get Article 2.
In Europe for over 200 years? Is that what you're telling me, Michael?
And then we became the world empire.
That's true. Right, exactly. So we abandoned the Monroe Doctrine. We never followed it at all. And the Monroe Doctrine never said, they said that Europe couldn't establish more colonies. They already had several. That they couldn't establish more colonies. It didn't say that if there's a country that does a mineral deal with a country somewhere else because we won't allow our companies to do it with them, that therefore we can topple the leader. This is completely illegal by our own Constitution.
I'm happy to explain it. It's true. In 1823, the Soviet Union did not yet exist, and other adversaries around the world did not yet exist. We have expanded the notion that European powers, which were a threat to us, should not interfere in the Western Hemisphere to those other adversaries as well, who you recognize are adversaries. It seems to me where the big difference here on the panel is that you, Dave, at least will acknowledge that America has interests and there are bad regimes. You're making some crazy claims that the Constitution doesn't allow the United States to be commander-in-chief of the army. You're making a crazy claim that Congress...
No, I'm not. I'm saying it doesn't allow them to declare a war.
You're making a crazy claim that it was... Excuse me. You're making a crazy claim that it was somehow illegal to follow a court order from 2020 to take out Maduro and arrest him. Anyway, you're making all sorts of crazy...
Any conflict is a war to this dude because he just doesn't operate on definitions. Like anything. We go in and we remove a fucking person that the United States and the world agrees is bad. All these other governments are like happy to see Maduro go. backing us on it. He's like, oh, this is a war now. It's no fucking war, you mouth breather.
Is that how we do foreign policy? By
hold on one second,
order?
guys. 1 second. I'm happy to. The difference here is, Dave, you at least acknowledge America has interests, and you're saying because we sometimes make mistakes. Hold on 1 second.
We don't do a policy by executive order. We're not doing policy. The president is exercising his commander-in-chief constitutional rights. Policy is what Congress does.
I'm just trying to get my point out. Because we sometimes make mistakes, you're saying that we should not pursue those interests, or you're saying that the consequences could be worse. The point that Kyle is making is actually different from yours. Kyle's point is that America has interests, and we should oppose those interests because he thinks that America is going to save
I'm actually making an argument. Thank you for the straw man. I'm actually making an argument.
We're running a bit out of time.
Intelligence and foreign policy.
Hang on a second,
Thank you very much.
I think we've covered this well. I do want to move, before we run out of time, I want to move to Minnesota, and I want to start with you, Coleman.
Oh, what's up? That's my mod right there. Everyone show him some respect in chat. Yeah, just watch it later. I'm just covering it. Any person, I'm sure you could watch this with a brain and probably come to 90% of the conclusions I came to already without watching it, without watching my coverage of it. I've heard your politics. It's pretty rational and sane.
One, if I may. This has been another huge story in the last week, and it goes to domestic law. It's, I think, a complex story, again, that requires a nuanced view, and I'll lay mine out, Coleman, just for the record. I've watched this video a dozen times or more from every potential angle, and it is my belief that it is utterly ridiculous to categorize what this woman, Renee Good, was doing as domestic terrorism. I see somebody who got a little panicky as the ICE guys came towards her and decided to drive away, and that the ICE guy in front of her car, who coincidentally a few months earlier got dragged by a car for a sustained period of time and had injuries as a result, potentially affecting his judgment in a similar situation, I suspect will be a key part of this.
I hate the domestic terrorism argument here for this. I don't agree with it. But what is actually being said in that argument is because she is out opposing the federal government from following and enacting federal law and executing federal law, that is a political act against the police, and the terrorism was hitting the cop, like the actual event to trigger the terrorism. But because she was doing so, actively trying to stop law enforcement for a political cause, that is the definition of political terrorism. I think that it's a little silly, but it at least logically follows, and Pierce isn't really he's not setting this up well.
Reacts in a equally panicky way and shoots her 3 times. And I don't see him as a cold-blooded murderer who did this deliberately as a way to murder somebody for the hell of it. I don't see her as a completely blameless part of this. I think she took decisions which led her down a path which I think were extremely unfortunate and, as it turned out, deadly for her. In other words, I think it's quite a complex story, which if you freeze frame it right down to every grab we've seen, anyone who thinks they have an absolute certainty about what happened here, I think is lying. And I think they're just, again, moving to the tribal place.
I think that there is an absolute certainty of what happened here. You can go check out Andrew C. McCarthy at National Review, former federal prosecutor that lays down legal precedent, law, and pretty much breaks us down verbatim and has a pretty damn good idea of what's going on. Pierce is kind of obfuscating here. Nobody can understand this. It's just such a gray area. No, it's not.
It has to be this because my side believe this, or it has to be this because my side believe that. Am I wrong?
I couldn't agree more, Piers. I want to separate 2 issues really quickly. I'll get to the tragic death of Renee Good, but first I want to separate the issue of how ICE officers are behaving in Minnesota in general, right? Right now, social media is being flooded with videos of ICE officers needlessly escalating situations, questioning U.S. citizens who legally do not have to answer any questions. Some ICE officers seem to be under the impression that you're not allowed to film them. You are allowed to film them. And even,
This is a misunderstanding of law. Hold on, let's go ahead. Is Minnesota a stop and ID state? Minnesota is not a stop. They legally do not. Okay, so maybe he's right. Yeah, you're not allowed to provide false names. If law enforcement has reasonable suspicion that you were involved in a crime, they may detain you and request your identification. That's the law in Minnesota. So if she's obstructing ICE, they are allowed to detain her. If people are obstructing ICE, they are allowed to be detained. This went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said if ICE is being obstructed, they are allowed to arrest people. This has all been parsed out in the law. So this is where Coleman, Hughes, and I disagree.
The worst part of this is that the Trump administration, the Department of Homeland Security, seems to have indicated to ICE officers that filming them is the same as doxing them, which it's not, right? So there is, obviously, I think there's probably tons of ICE officers not getting videoed that are doing their jobs responsibly, and it's a tough job and it's a dangerous job, and I respect that. But there's a lot of ICE officers that are just running roughshod over all of their responsibilities as officers, and they're being fanned on by the administration. I think that's really important to say up front, that that's a real phenomenon and needs to be talked about. Now, let's separate that from the issue of...
There's been 1,000% attacks against ICE since last year. 1,000% increase in attacks against ICE since last year. There's instances of ICE officers being assassinated. There's instances of ICE being killed in their buildings. Like, it's fucking wild to say that, like, oh yeah, a couple of them acted irresponsible. I'm sure that there's a couple individuals that acted poorly, but generally, if you have violent resistance that's obstructing you, you are allowed to arrest people, and if they resist that arrest, you are allowed to use force. Fuck around and find out.
Renee Good, who was tragically killed by Jonathan Ross. Now here, Piers, you're right to point out there are so many critiques of how this officer and his partner handled the situation. Why, you know, officers are trained not to be in front of a car to begin with, right?
The car changed direction to make him in front of it. He approached from the side.
That's one on a laundry list of ways in which this was terrible policing. However, a lot of prominent Democrats are saying that this is murder.
He also detained, she was being detained. You're not supposed to give them access to flee if you're detaining them.
Murder, that is a legal term with a legal standard. Now, if this goes to trial, you know, it's likely to get removed to a federal court, which is going to be favorable for the officer. And what the jury is probably going to be instructed is if this officer had reason to believe he could have suffered bodily harm, he or his partner could have suffered serious bodily harm, then by statute, he's authorized to use deadly force.
What the
jury is going to be instructed if he felt he was in serious danger. Now, we get the benefit of seeing 5 different angles on the video in slow motion over and over and over again. So we can come to the conclusion that, yeah, he was out of he was out of line of the car during those second and third shots. But he didn't have that advantage. He experienced that in real time, in the blur of real life. The whole interaction was less than 2 seconds, and he had one shot at it. Not only that, his partner had his hand through the window, which, as you said, is precisely the situation that had put him in the hospital 6 months prior. It's going to be tough to convince a jury that he didn't have reason to believe he was in risk, or his partner, of serious bodily harm.
I think from a legal perspective, I think you're probably right, and I think a jury may well end up making that.
He's saying that, like, the police were in the right, essentially, and then that the police also acted poorly because the officer ended up in front of the car after she backed it up and changed direction like 60, 70 degrees to put him in front of the car.
Determination based on the application of the law. But Kyle, you know, I talked about both sides taking sort of implacable, incendiary positions. You compared ICE agents to Nazis, described the officer as an ICE thug who murdered a woman on camera by shooting her in the face. I mean, you're determining there what we have watched with our own eyes, because we got the benefit of seeing all the videos. Is somebody making a deliberate calculation to murder that woman for no reason?
I think he did. And
Why would he do that?
Study the video closely. Well, I'll explain it to you. So first of all, these guys are all roided up freaks. Let's point that out. That these are like Proud Boys and white nationalists because, and you know, the dregs of society who have now been given a gun and a badge.
Well, that's a ridiculous generalization. And again, I don't think that helps. That kind of generalization doesn't help your argument. It makes you sound equally deranged.
No. I don't care about convincing you guys with your cult of fake nuance. I care about speaking to the American people who saw with
God forbid we should have nuance.
Yeah, because it's fake nuance. That's the problem. You have J.D. Vance out there saying that this guy should have absolute immunity. Absolute immunity? So if you rape somebody, he should be able to get off? This is fucking ridiculous. Absolute immunity.
I don't agree. Nor do I think, Kyle, that Renee Good was deliberately trying to run over this ICE officer. I just don't think that there's any evidence that she was trying to do that or to cause him bodily harm. I think it was quite clear from the wheel positioning that she was trying to drive away. And the guy was ignoring his training to stand in front of her, and he had a past incident which probably in the moment made him fear the same thing was going to happen.
Piers, we have to have one
if you watch closely,
just one little bit to inject some facts.
I literally never even made the fucking point I was trying to make at the beginning.
Don't talk at the same time.
And the wheels were aimed at the cop when she accelerated.
All right, Kyle, I'll come back to you. No, Kyle, I will come back to you. Let Michael just interject on this one point.
This is really important because I feel sorry for the woman. It's very sad that she died. I'm not in any way happy that she died. She was in that position, one, because her lesbian partner said, drive, baby, drive. The lesbian partner then said, it's my fault.
Why is it relevant that she's a lesbian?
Hold on 1 second.
Why is that relevant that she's a partner? Why is it relevant that she's a lesbian?
1 second, Kyle. I'm just trying to
actually, I would say it's irrelevant that she's a lesbian. Secondly, drive can be.
Kyle, you called them Nazis. Why? Well, because they're all roided up freaks. You said that he tried to kill her intentionally. Why? Because they're roided up reeks. Like, his only argument to substantiate his claim is ad homs. This is him crashing out again.
Being entreated to drive away, which is what I think she was doing. Thirdly, the demeanor of Renee Good in the final video that came out shows somebody pretty calm, certainly not confrontational, certainly doesn't look to me like somebody intent on mowing down an ICE officer. I think she just wanted to get out of there.
Are you suggesting, Piers, hold on, are you suggesting that because a woman says, I'm not mad, that means she isn't mad? I think anyone who's ever interacted with a woman knows that's not what that phrase means. Second of all, we don't have to just judge by her words. She accelerated. You can look at it in the footage while the tires are aimed at the cop. And this is a message. I feel bad for her. She was indoctrinated into thinking that you're allowed to drive your car at cops or disobey police orders or block traffic and create a dangerous situation. This is an important message to all the leftists out there who want to do this. You cannot drive your SUV into a police officer. If you do that, you will be shot in the face and desert it. And it will be very, very sad.
All right, Kyle, back to you.
I love that we're now doing character assassination of a 37-year-old soccer mom who got shot in the face 3 times. You're fucking disgusting for doing that, and you know that you're...
He's doing character... He said, I didn't want this woman to die. That's character assassination, but when asked to substantiate your claims that they're all Nazis and he did this intentionally, all you did was character assassination. When Michael Knowles called him out for factual inconsistencies and being wrong, all he did was character assassination. Every single accusation is a confession from him. Everyone. All he's done is character assassination. Every single point, when asked to substantiate it, all he does is attack character. That's literally his only thing.
You're disgusting for doing that.
And if you watch now, he's still, you're disgusting.
The video closely, he switches hands with his phone to prepare to grab his gun before he was in any danger whatsoever. Okay, so this guy, he knew what he was doing. He knew what he was getting himself into. These people are looking for trouble. They're going to...
When somebody accelerates a car in your direction, that puts you in danger.
Minneapolis, they are cracking skulls. They are rounding up innocent people. They absolutely are Trump's Gestapo, and everybody knows it.
All right, let me bring in Dave Smith. Dave Smith, what's your view of this?
Well, I gotta say, as much as it pains me to say, I really completely agreed with Coleman on that. I'm just kidding. I don't mind agreeing with Coleman. No, but I thought that was a very thoughtful take, and I think I agreed with all of that. I mean, look, like, this is a really tragic thing that happened. I don't think she was trying to run over the officer. It seemed to me that she was trying to peel out of there, and he got spooked and he shot her. And look, however you feel about this morally, the fact is that in the United States of America and just about every other government, if law enforcement has you there and telling you, you just can't peel out. I mean, it's just a really unwise move to try to drive your car away. And again, you can feel about that however you want to, much like the Iranians shooting rioters who they think are going to topple the government. Like, any government's going to shoot rioters that are trying to topple that government, including ours. And however you feel about it, that's the way states work. I do think there's like a broader thing that
Dave Smith made a good point. I need to stop the video and acknowledge, since this started, Dave Smith made a single good point.
Would really think that Trump supporters, right-wingers in this country might want to think about. And I say this as someone who's, I'm a real immigration restrictionist. I mean, to me, that I don't think everyone in the world has a right to enter the United States of America. I think that the American people have a right to take in whoever we want or whoever we don't want, in the same way that I have a right to, have whoever I want at my house for any reason that I choose to. And so anybody who's here illegally, I think we have a right to remove them. But I do think you got to start to ask some real questions about what type of juice we're getting for this type of squeeze, and real questions of what we're doing to our own neighborhoods here. I mean, you really do have a situation, as Coleman kind of outlined, where like masked federal agents are kind of acting like thugs, pulling out guns in suburban neighborhoods in front of, and for all of this, for this big show of force that is such a
this juice worth the squeeze argument, this is almost exactly what Obama did to states that had legalized marijuana. There was like 300, 400 raids or something like that under his tenure, where he'd go into states that had legal weed, he'd raid them, he'd arrest tons of people, he'd seize tons of their property and things like that, ignoring the state laws. He just didn't have protesters out there obstructing the cops, because it's different when the other side doesn't. The side that obstructs police almost pretty much any time besides January 6th, the side that obstructs police, attacks police, were the ones that voted for Obama, so they weren't out there protesting him. I guarantee you, if there were people out there obstructing police when Obama was raiding fucking state legal weed facilities in California, the same thing probably would have happened.
Provocation of the radical left in this country and getting them out on the streets. I've seen the Trump administration says 10 million illegals came in under Joe Biden. I've seen estimates that are north of 30 million illegals totally in the country. And for all of this, we're talking about getting like a couple 100,000 of them. So in other words, we're not even making a dent on the real problem. And yet we are doing something where more incidents like this are more and more likely. And I gotta say, and I appreciate even that Michael said, like, there's a tragic thing, but I'm sure he saw too, some of like the ghoulish response from so many right-wingers, like on Twitter and stuff, celebrating.
And you know what? It reminded me.
You know what? Fuck around and find out moment, but you don't have to be happy about it. Like, I wasn't happy Ashley Babbitt got her fuck around and find out moment, but it's very, very similar to what happened to Renee Good.
Dave, it reminded me of the reaction from the left to Charlie Kirk's murder.
Yeah.
There was just a complete. There was not just
a different situation.
Not just an absence of. Well, I would say different things, but not just an absence of basic empathy and humanity, but a willful, gleeful celebration of somebody's death, right? And in both cases, I don't think either person deserved to die. It's just my gut feeling about it. So at the very least, even if you do think she brought the situation on herself, and I certainly don't think she was blameless in her decision-making leading up to what happened, to the confrontation, but even if you believe that, to then sort of gleefully celebrate, she had it coming, she deserved it, blah, blah, but she's a mother of a young kid, and she,
I mean, she did deserve it if she hit a cop. Like, you don't have to be happy about it, but if the police shooting was justified, which 4 people on this panel are saying it was probably justified, then she deserved it. You don't have to be happy about it, you don't have to celebrate it, but if it's justified, then it was deserved.
She, is not even 40 years old. So what have we become as a society when your first thought is not, this is a tragedy. But whatever you think of what happened here, it's a tragedy that she ends up dead. I think.
And he hasn't been arrested yet. And Jonathan Ross hasn't been arrested yet. And stop thinking about why that is.
Coleman was right about that too. He's not going to jail. I mean, this is just, I'm sorry, and look, the legal system.
There might not even be a trial, Dave. There might not even be a trial, bro.
Well, look,
he didn't do anything wrong.
Well, look, but as Coleman pointed out, and I mean, I would say it's slightly different, but the legal system is totally rigged on behalf of cops, and it's just not.
He didn't do anything wrong. Everyone's laid out the argument. Everyone's laid out the law. Everyone's laid out why he didn't do anything wrong. And all he has to respond with is, you're a bad person because you disagree with me. All he has is character assassination. All he's done is character assassinations. He has no substantive argument. He makes his point. When someone disagrees with him, he insults them.
The same type of standard for federal law enforcement or for local law enforcement that it is for regular people. And when legally speaking, once
but we have seen some cops go to prison too, though.
Okay. Yeah.
You know the difference. There's a you know what there is.
There's a car coming at a cop.
There is a cultural aspect to this, and I'm not going to.
Oh yeah. Jesus in the chat. Give him a thank you if you're enjoying this, because this was his idea. Everyone say thank you, Indian Jesus, and call him a Chad. I'm
not going to go back into all this again, but if this situation had happened in my country, I'm in London right now, if this had happened in central London,
they'd be alive.
It's almost unthinkable this kind of situation would happen because we just don't obviously have the gun culture. And I've always said the problem with the police shootings in America or law enforcement shootings is that they have an understandable presumption, law enforcement, that pretty much everyone may be packing a gun. In countries like mine, where nobody really has a gun, the police don't have that presumption, so they don't shoot, right? It's a kind of chicken and the egg thing. And, it's as I learned when I took on this issue, Americans don't want to hear it from an English accent. You got rid of us with guns.
Pierce,
I get it. Next year is the 250th anniversary, where you will all celebrate getting rid of us of guns. I get it. But I do think that what the rest of the world perceives as a trigger-happy gun country is actually because there are 400 million guns in circulation, 1 million new guns get sold every month. So the law enforcement always have a fear, a rational fear, actually, that everyone they stop in any kind of confrontation may have a gun. And that simply doesn't exist in most countries.
And that puts police on a little bit of a higher edge. So she didn't have a gun. There was no threat of her having a gun. She had a deadly weapon, which is when she decided to use her car against human bodies. The scenario I keep putting out there is if you take a kitchen knife, which is originally intended to cut things in your kitchen, and you start swinging it at cops that are trying to arrest you, they're going to shoot you because you've decided to take that item and turn it into a deadly weapon. The same way you do when you take your car and start using it against human bodies. It's exactly the same as picking up a knife and swinging it around at cops. Same fucking thing. You don't have to hit the cop with the knife. All you have to do is pick it up and look at them. Same thing with the car. You don't have to hit the cop with the car. All you have to do is drive it at them. And that's enough. You don't have to hit them, even though this guy was hit. Once you've shown you're going to take that object and use it as a weapon, it becomes a deadly weapon because of the amount of threat that that particular weapon has. Once you cross that threshold, you are now eligible to be shot by police. You don't have to celebrate her death. You don't have to say, good, she died, and one less libtard protester. That's bad. But she deserved it. She put herself in this situation.
If your cops were worried that people might have a gun, maybe they wouldn't be showing up and arresting so many people for tweets and putting them in jail.
I totally agree. It was revealed yesterday 12,000 people have been arrested for social media posts. It's absolutely bloody ridiculous. But you know what? I'd rather that than young mothers getting shot dead for doing a right-hand turn to get away from, ICE officers shouting at them.
I'd rather not have a First Amendment and protect one fucking person's life than attack police. Okay, I guess that's your preference, but it ain't how it is here.
But she did a left-hand turn first.
And there was a former cop who was arrested.
But before we end this, I just want to end, Dave, you've had this big ding-dong with Dan Bongino, who's now left the FBI. You said that his legacy is covering for pedophiles. This alludes to the Epstein scandal. He responded by a lot of personal attacks on you. But as we've been talking...
It's not an objective fact. Dan Bongino was the biggest QAnon conspiracy theorist. That's why they brought him in, was to look into this, because he was such a QAnon conspiracy theorist that he was the best person to go into the FBI and make sure there was nothing going on with Epstein. But as soon as he disagrees with the narrative, he suddenly, all of his 10 years of being a conspiracy theorist go out the window, because he said, you know what, I gotta peek behind the curtain, and all that stuff you guys are speculating that it's there, it's actually not. And it's like, oh, he's compromised now because he disagrees with us. There's no one they trust as soon as you disagree with their narratives.
Bill and Hillary Clinton have defied a congressional subpoena to appear before the House Oversight Committee about Epstein. How significant is that, do you think?
Well, it certainly doesn't look good for them, but I mean, if former presidents are ever held...
They should have the same punishment that Steve Bannon got.
Accountable for anything, aside from Donald Trump on the ridiculous trumped-up charges. But if we're actually holding politicians accountable for the crimes that they've committed in the past, well, that'll be the first time that I've ever seen it. So I don't know what Congress is going to do next. My guess is that they'll probably just do nothing, because that's what Congress typically ends up doing in these situations. But yeah, Dan Bongino, listen, I don't know what to say. Dan Bongino is in this impossible situation here, which is why he spazzed out and started talking about my kids and my family and stuff. And look, I know I did say that his legacy will forever be protecting pedophiles, but again, it's a matter of record. That is just true. And so, look, Dan Bongino's got a real problem. You were either lying then or you're lying now.
It's not protecting pedophiles. It's that they didn't have enough evidence to go after anybody. It just wasn't there. It's speculation. It wasn't something they could prove in court. And the government, when the government makes an act, because of the power dynamic of our government, when the government makes an accusation of you doing something like pedophilia, something illegal, they have to be able to substantiate it in court. They have to be able to prove it. You are able to face your accuser, give your side of the story, and argue back in front of a court. So the government is not allowed to just put out all the information from their investigation in there and smear people's credibility without proof to back up their claims. We don't want that from the government. That's a bad thing. And for him saying that we need to release every little bit of information, investigation notes that led to nothing, speculation that didn't have fact behind it, somebody eyewitness saying something but with no proof, you don't actually have to release these things, and it's actually a net bad. It's irresponsible of the government to accuse somebody of something without proof and without allowing them to fight back against it, without allowing them a fair trial to voice their defense in front of a jury of their peers. It's irresponsible. It's against our justice system. It completely tramples over the due process rights. There was not enough proof. We saw this when Alex Acosta, testified in front of Congress in 2019, something unsealed in the Epstein files. He said, flat out, the grand jury of Florida, when the fucking Florida government went after them, they went with dozens of charges. Only one got through. Only one. The grand jury said you only have enough proof for this one thing. And that's what they charged him with, and that's what they got a conviction. And then there was a grand jury when the federal prosecution stepped in. And they took all these charges of allegations that didn't have proof behind them from a bunch of people that said they were victims. There was no proof of their claims. So when they took it in front of a grand jury, the grand jury said, you don't have enough to get the conviction. That's what happened. There was no sweetheart deal. They just didn't have proof. And Dan Bongino said that. We don't have the proof to go after people that you speculate are guilty.
You gotta somehow, if you're gonna come back to this world of doing these shows on the internet, you're gonna have to explain that to people at some point. Like, you made this one claim, got in there, turned around and gave a hostage video where you said none of that exists at all. And now the stuff's been declassified. So he said he read through the entire files, and he knows for a fact that Jeffrey Epstein killed himself. But we just found out there's like 5 million documents in the entire file. So like, what exactly is he claiming that he read? And what
I assume it was.
No, see, the official, like, there's no proof that Epstein didn't kill himself. He's asking to disprove a negative. I invented this theory out of thin air because it looks a little fishy to me. Now you have to disprove my theory. No, that's not how that works. You made up the theory, you have to substantiate it, and then we disprove your substantiation. You are the affirmative. When you say Epstein didn't kill himself, and all you have is it looks fishy, that means you have nothing. There's nothing to disprove there. You have to substantiate it, and then once you have, then it gets disproven. But saying that Tartaglione was hired by, or choked Epstein out and then was removed from the cell, which is what happened. Tartaglione and Epstein both said that Epstein asked him to kill him. Epstein admitted that in his cell. I asked that guy to kill me. And people are saying, oh, that's proof that he didn't kill himself. It's fucking silly. Both Tartaglione and Epstein admit that Epstein asked him to kill him.
It's all declassified now. Yes, sure. But I'm just saying, it's all declassified now.
But also,
now,
the bottom line,
he can explain what he saw.
Yeah, and the bottom line is people on the MAGA side and the Trump administration, they can all say whatever they want. The truth is, they took us all up the hill of full and total transparency should they win the last election. And then suddenly, earlier this, in 2025, suddenly the shutters came down. Nothing was going to get revealed.
That's the thing, is like, the transparency is showing the results of the investigation, not revealing every single note that the investigators took down that wasn't substantiated. That's irresponsible. Transparency means I'm going to show you the results and show you nothing was there. Not, we questioned this person based off of a rumor, so now let's release the rumor and let the public pretend it's true. That's not what transparency means. They're asking for a level of transparency that's almost never been granted in U.S. or the Blackstonian legal system's history.
And now, bit by torturous bit, it's all coming out, and it's very devastating, and it's causing a lot of carnage with people's jobs and lives, and quite rightly. But we are still well away. But we're still well away from full accountability or transparency. Yeah. They could just release them.
They've only released 1%.
They could release it all tomorrow.
Of the Epstein
and
files.
I don't know why they haven't released them.
They have to go through each individual file and redact things. When they were rushing to get as much out as they could, they were sloppy as shit. They redacted things that shouldn't have been redacted. They didn't redact things that should have been redacted, like victims' pictures. They redacted Trump's name on something, and then when that was reviewed, they took that redaction away. They were making tons of errors. They were putting redactions on the wrong way, so Python scripts could remove the redactions. They did things wrong when they tried to rush, and then they slowed it down to make sure they're doing it right. That's why they're going slow, is to avoid mistakes and not make the government liable to lawsuits.
All I know is when people in officialdom don't release documents, it's because they don't want people to see them. And that's just a logical presumption, whether they're on the left or the right. I've got to leave it there. Great panel. I always think the mark of a great panel is when you get to the end of the hour and you feel like you've learned stuff. And the great thing about you guys is I learned a lot in that hour. Didn't necessarily agree with all your opinions, but I learned a lot of stuff, and I appreciate that. So thank you all very much.
Great.
Thanks for having us, Piers. Thank you, Piers.
Piers Morgan.
All right, that's it for the Kyle Crash Out. Nothing of substance, pretty much, from Kyle Kulinski. I think he made 2 minor points that I agreed with that were correct, and everything else of it was just character attacks. He said something factually incorrect. Michael Knowles corrected him. He abandoned the argument and just started insulting Michael Knowles. He made a statement about ICE being fascist. When asked to substantiate it, he just insulted everybody. He made claims about the offers. When asked to substantiate it, he insulted people. It was just insult after insult and after insult because he took a massive L here. He lost the debate extremely hard. At least Dave Smith, for how stupid he is on most subjects, wasn't an asshole. He was polite. I don't know. Again, Michael Knowles is arguing for interventionism here. So as much as I disagree with Michael Knowles about cultural issues and maybe economic issues, the fact that he's on this particular argument, he's making one I agree with. I knew right from the opening because I was going to side with him here. He's arguing a point I believe in. So that's all I got. Indian Jesus, I hope you enjoyed it. I covered it with as much depth as I could. Anytime I felt something needed to be elaborated on, I did. I am senior political analyst and debate master, average debate enjoyer. If you'd like to you know, come on, hit me up, debate against something, just hit me up on Twitter. All my links are in the bio, and I do debates. I do all sorts of fun shit, so yeah, hit me up. But this was something I just wanted to cover. On Tuesday, Jake Farr and I will be going over what Nick Fluentes went on his show as